tonight's edition of the Conservative Action Network show. I'm your host today, Doreen Finkel. The Conservative Action Network show is sponsored by CampusTeaParties.com. And tonight our topic is the American Dream. What is it? How do we achieve it? What has happened to it in the past few years? And where's it going in the future? And I have with me tonight is guest Dr. Joe Arminio. He's from the Dean of Faculty of the Society of Statesmen. And he can fill us in on what exactly is the American Dream.
Nice to be back again, Doreen. What is the American Dream and what can we do about it? As I see the American Dream, it's a situation where most people earn, or a family can earn, a living wage. That is, it's only necessary for one parent to work outside the home. If the second parent wants to work, they can. They don't have to. And they have a home, they have a car, and the next generation is going to be better off than they are. I know this is the material aspect, and of course there is a deeper philosophical, even spiritual element, but this is the material side of that. And if you take that as your definition, the American Dream is not alive. It's been dead 40 years. Yet we didn't hear that in the political campaign just ended, did we? We heard how it's still alive, though barely.
No, but it's funny you mentioned that, because I thought the American Dream was owning a house, 2 cars, 2 kids, a dog, maybe.
Well,
and
on credit cards,
so
that's right, on credit cards and debts, and you're working 5 or 6 jobs. No, that's not the American Dream. That's on borrowed time. That's on borrowed money. Now, the American Dream is
so that dream is gone.
That dream is gone. Now, it can be revived, though. It can be revived, but it's gone. It's been gone 40 years, since the early 1970s. That's been gone. Where a majority of families now had both parents working outside the home. The living wage is at an end. And a lot of other bad things happen around that time, too.
But that's terrible. So then you can't have a gal, let's say she wants to become a stay-at-home mom.
Yeah, that's less likely today than much less likely than it used to be. Or let's suppose, heaven forbid, your family wants to know what's going on in the world, wants to know what's going on in science or politics or history. Both parents are working so hard, they don't have the time to look into it. Who has time to supervise the child? Who has time to supervise the faculty? They don't. Divorce incidents, more divorces, family breaking up. So we used to talk about, or we still talk about, a federal budget deficit. We have a family deficit. And of course, the implications of that are enormous, because if the American Dream is not alive, then that really means that we can't make it as individuals and individual families. We have to then turn to the state. We have to turn to the collective.
Again, and here we go with communism.
With communism, that's correct. And perhaps some say there is an effort, I would call it slow-paced communism, to bring this outcome about. Well, we saw in the presidential campaign where both sides were asserting the American Dream is alive, but neither side, and I'm a student of these speeches, and we did talk about some of these speeches, neither side actually defined the American Dream very carefully, and that's how they could get away with saying it's still alive. But if you define it with specificity, then you discover, in fact, it's dead. But what to do about it?
Go back to the family relying on the collective. And you mentioned in a previous show that property rights and all that are being eroded.
Eroded, yes. That's right. Well, one of the ways they're being eroded, if you have a situation where both parents have to work like dogs outside the home, multiple jobs, and the family coming apart, and they come home to all-out warfare with the children.
And they're tired.
They're tired and all the rest of it. Then this means then that they can't study what the government is doing on their behalf. They can't offer a check and balance against what the government is doing. And that means we're more likely to lose our liberties and slip into a collective. So again, it comes back to the American Dream. That's central to this whole exercise. This isn't just an academic discussion. This is a very practical discussion we're having.
So then, and they don't have time to look at what's happening in the real world. And that's how
the world outside their world.
Yes, the world outside. That's right. And that's how come a lot of people that I've talked to didn't even know what Agenda 21 was.
They don't have time to think about it. Or if they come across it by accident, they don't have time to study it. Oh, they'll get to that next week. They're too busy paying tomorrow's bill. And they're busy. They're constantly busy. They're under pressure. And they don't have the time to make connections, to think things through. That's exactly the problem.
And stuff like what we study is they don't have time to look at the higher ed and see all the liberalism that is indoctrinated and filtered through from the higher ed to the lower education system.
That's right. They don't have time to supervise the faculty. They have to hand off the child and just hope for the best. And it's been getting worse and worse, not getting better and better. Even in the Christian schools, we're not getting the outcome we wanted.
So when you say a communism society thrives on that, where they have to hand the child off to the society to deal with?
Absolutely. So if there was a plot afoot, it's a very successful one. The idea is to get you away from the American dream, get the family from no longer being, in a sense, self-sufficient, get in a situation where they have to depend upon others, especially depend upon the state. And then they can begin to work upon, most importantly, work upon your mind, and of course, even work upon your soul.
Right. And the latter one is of course, the indoctrination you.
That is correct.
So now, I have a family, okay, and we have 2 kids. And I'll be honest with you, we do struggle a little bit. And, I was a stay-at-home mom. However, I did receive income because I took piano students on the side. But we struggled. We didn't have the Cadillacs and the Ferraris, and we didn't exactly keep up with the Joneses on the block. But you know what? I look at that now, and I see where my kids are as compared to the rest of society. And my son has got a 2100 on his SAT.
There you go. See, you put your value on the right things. You value the right things. But it came at a material price. But once upon a time, though, Americans were able to do both. They had a good bit of what this world could offer, and they also had children who were being brought up correctly.
So would you say that progressivism has caused a lot of these issues with the family?
I wouldn't call it very progressive. It's a degradation, but you're right.
Actually, you're right.
But that's what they call themselves. That's
right.
That's right. They call themselves progressives, but they're anything but progressives. They may well be slow-paced communists, is what they may be.
Right, and also in education, they also use the term social justice education, which I want to tell the viewers is Marxism.
Yes.
Okay, it's just a nicer term for that.
That's right.
But so now we do struggle on our income, but we get by. Okay. I wanted to ask you: is the American dream like totally out of reach?
No, it's not, but we need to be acting very soon. And we're not. We continue to drift, and we continue to head toward the cliff.
So my personal thing about this is that, yes, women, because the women's movement was also part of the progressive thing, women, yes, should have a choice outside.
If it's possible.
But when it comes time to family and the children, I believe that for the child's sake, they need to stay home for the child, to make a sacrifice for that, for whatever time period that is.
But they're finding themselves in situations where they can't, where they have to work outside the home. They have to make a choice. Or sometimes maybe they make the wrong choice. They work harder than they have to maintain the kind of lifestyle they want to maintain. But they shouldn't have to make that choice. The American dream should only go from strength to strength. And it had. In fact, for 150 years, approximately, from 1820 to 1970, average American wages, adjusted for inflation, this is real wages, after you take into account inflation, had been rising at about 1.5% a year, with, of course, setbacks here and there. So in other words, it was generally rising. That stopped in the early 70s. That stopped 40 years ago.
So the wages aren't keeping up with the
No. The wage. Now, what happened was, in the early 70s, real wages, these are adjusted for inflation, dropped out of the sky 15 to 20%. So they fell from early 1970s levels. They've been building up. They fell down to lower 1960s levels, and they've stayed there ever since. And what bothers me to no end is that campaign after campaign after campaign, you don't hear anyone telling you this.
And why is that?
Well, I wonder what side they're on. Either they don't know, or they're on someone else's side. Because if I'm a leader, if I'm a statesman, and that's something that we like to encourage in society as statesmen, then I'm going to alert the public to what's happening and how we can fix it. instead of having them wallow in this illusion, this fantasy that the American dream is still here. I said a moment ago about us going off the cliff. Let's be careful, let's be specific about these metaphors. The American dream is dead. It's been dead 40 years. We still seem to have some abundance because we are still able to borrow, because the world outside America will continue to lend us money to allow us to borrow. That day is very, very quickly coming to an end. I mean, it's a matter of a few years.
It is, and that's we often talk about the financial collapse too.
That's right. So these are two different events. Financial
Right.
collapse is one
Right.
thing, American dream ending is another. One precedes the other.
Right, and we're about 16.4 trillion in debt.
That's right.
Okay.
And now what's more important, let's put that in perspective. Let's talk now a lot about gross domestic product. See, that lets us measure year to year to year. Because if you say 16 trillion, that's a lot of money, it's a big debt, but what does it mean? Gross domestic product is just, in shorthand, is a way to measure the wealth of the country, the income of the country at a point in time. Right now, our debt is about the same size as our wealth. It's 100%. When a country gets to 100%, it's about finished. People don't want to lend you money anymore. It's the same thing with yourself.
That's right. So then buying a house would be totally out of reach.
Well, it's tough already. It would be very, very hard if that happens. You're going to see a tripling, quadrupling in gas prices, food, and basic necessities. You're not going to take vacations. You're not going to drive the car much. In fact, you're going to stay where you live. And perhaps that's the whole point of the exercise. You're no longer going to have a car. You're going to have a bicycle. And you're going to stay inside your little compound. And they're going to be able to watch you even more carefully. And you're going to be more dependent upon the government and more thankful for whatever crumbs they give you. Perhaps that's the object of the exercise.
It is the object, and we're going to get to the nanny state. And you know, the last election, a lot of us think that we've become a society of takers, and there were a lot of handouts given out during the last election. And it's like what you said. Pretty soon, we are actually in heading towards the nanny state. And those who pay taxes, well, their taxes are going to go up.
Mm-hmm. The few that can afford
right.
to pay the tax,
Right.
you're going to be glad you can still pay a tax. You still have a little bit of range of motion, some liberties, but not as many as you used to have.
And there will be those who do make money, but 60% of that will have to go to the government to pay for all of these services.
And so what will happen is they'll work less hard, they'll work not as hard as they have been working. You'll see a ratcheting back, a scaling back. The economy will grow even slower. This is what we saw in England. We saw this in England after the collapse of their empire, after World War II. They went into essentially into a dive and began to descend year by year, deeper into the grips of the collective. Less and less hope.
So, right, and then, and I'll tell you, and I see this right now, I see people going to work, and, you know, even my husband comes home and he says, why do I have to pay all these taxes to those who don't want to work?
They're being encouraged not to work, and this message is somehow getting across in the school system because they're attacking the American dream, they're attacking the free market system, they're attacking individual responsibility, an absolute standard. All these things are under attack. And one thing I hope we can talk about is the actual budgetary figures, and as we talked at the beginning of the discussion, what we can do about it.
Going back to the school systems, and I noticed this in our school system, it seems to be that every child gets a trophy, no matter how hard they try,
That's right.
or if they don't try.
Yeah, the outcome-based education is the term. They want to get us away from taking individual responsibility every way they can. So at a very young age, they're nurturing this notion that you're not responsible, but the group is, and the group obviously deserves a passing grade or even a high grade, and you don't have to work so hard. The group's being taken care of. And so now that passes on when they're adults in society. You don't have to work so hard as an adult because your group will be taken care of, the nanny state.
Oh my goodness! So that means all of them will be requesting laptop computers at government expense at some point.
And expecting to be given it. That's right. One day they're not going to get any more computers. There's going to be no more money to give them. And that day's not far away. You know, so the question is, what can we do to avert it? And suppose it does happen, what do we do then? So these are two different questions. We embrace for the collapse, try to prevent it if you can.
So then we have to go back to the education system also and develop a curriculum that teaches perhaps self-reliance
Well, you're talking
or
about
individualism,
you're talking about philosophy, and you're talking about actually back to understanding what is
Constitution.
the Constitution, and also what it is to be a Christian, what it is to have more responsibility. We did have that notion, that sense at one time in this country. We've lost it.
Wow. This is all.
Yeah, it's it's distressing. Now, what I'd like to bring up, if we could, is the budgetary figures. Let's bring some hard specificity to this. Remember, we said that both political campaigns, the Obama-Romney camp, are telling us the American dream is alive and barely, when in fact it's been dead 40 years. Well, I'm holding in my hand some very simple numbers, just a few variables that they could have told us, but they didn't. They could tell us in school, but they're not. Why aren't they? And what are these numbers, for instance? All right.
They just don't want you to know.
They don't want you to know
it's
how.
Like the job market. They don't want you to know the
That's
truth.
right. So let's first look at the situation. Now, remember
Right.
before we talked about gross domestic product?
Yes.
We're not going to talk anymore about how many dollars, because it's hard to relate that. We're going to talk about percentage of gross domestic product so we can compare year to year. And I'm holding in my hand a projection, or the situation in 2009, and then what the Congressional Budget Office and the CBO advises the members of Congress, what the CBO thinks the situation will be like in 2035. And I can tell you that it just gets worse past that. So what we learn is, and I'm going to give you 5 variables here. Social Security right now is 4.8%, or I should say in 2009, 4.8% of GDP. And in 2035, it's going to be 6%. So you see, it's going up, but not that much. So that's not something to be too concerned about. Medicare and Medicaid, though, problems here. Medicare and Medicaid, Medicare is 3.5%. In 2035, it's going to be doubled at 7.2. Medicaid is going to be 1.8 today, and it's going to be 2.8 in 2035. So you see, there's a doubling there in the health care costs. Then I take
the health care that was supposed to
be
save.
fixed. No, they're not fixing anything. No. Then I take you to expenditures which are keeping the government running, including national defense. Now, right now, or in 2009, which was just a couple of years ago, we were spending about 16% of GDP on keeping the government running, including defense. We're only going to be able to afford 10.5% GDP by 2035. Now, and then the interest payments. Interest payments today are 1.2%. They're going to be quadruple that in 2035, 7.5. See, that's after the financial collapses. So if we go over those numbers again, what we're saying is that Social Security is going to rise, but not too much. That's not where the problem is. And health care is going to double. This is if we don't do anything. Government expenditures, including defense, are going to have to be slashed by a third, from around 16 down to 10%, and interest payments are going to quadruple. Now, all the time, revenue is not rising very much to keep up, so the deficit is going to get even bigger than it already is. So when I look at this, I say to myself, and why didn't my elected officials give me this information? Why did the people who nominated them insist they gave this information? Why didn't the journalists demand this information? Why don't the academics demand this information? What it's telling me is that at the way we're going, if we don't do something soon, healthcare costs are going to double, interest payments are going to quadruple, and we're not going to be able to afford any national defense whatsoever, so we can't defend ourselves because we can't afford to cut back the rest of the government, or that it will slash all the non-defense government expenditures. So you can't fix the potholes, you can't build more bridges, you can't protect the nuclear energy factory plant down the street. You're going to have to make some awful trade-off. Either you can't defend your country and you're going to have to depend upon the United Nations or some other collective, China, to protect you, or you're going to still be able to defend yourself, but you don't want to live here because you can't afford public infrastructure and schools and roads and so forth. So obviously it's an impossible situation either way. That's where we're going. So they should have told us this. How long did it take me to tell you? I mean, these are a few numbers, but this tells you the tale. They didn't. They just hinted at it. And Obama, of course, told us that this is a time of hope.
He twisted the...
He went the other way. That's right. Obama and Romney and Ryan didn't tell us these numbers. They told us there's tough trouble ahead, but they didn't make it specific. They didn't give us hard, fast numbers. Obama didn't even do that. And he's the one in the White House.
Wow. So you're giving everybody something to think about over here. So now, let me ask you this. If you were a teacher in school, let's say you taught seniors in high school, what kind of advice would you be giving them for their future in this state?
Well, two things. One, of course, is there's three things really. The first thing is you better strengthen your relationship with Christ. And to do that, you've got to know about the facts pertaining to his life. Don't go on hearsay. Find out the facts. Search out the scriptures. You'll build trust. You'll maintain your hope. Remind yourself you live in heavenly places. By acquainting yourself with the facts, you'll maintain that hope while everything around you is coming apart. The second thing is you've got to work hard. You've got to acquire knowledge and talents for whatever career you pick, or maybe you're going to end up having several different careers. And the third thing is, and of course is what you and I do all the time, Doreen, I would encourage them to get involved in the political process, but get involved in the right way. Now that means they need to be able to distinguish friend from foe. And that takes a little thinking. And now I'm going to pose a question to you, as opposed to them. Is it automatically follow that the enemy of my enemy is my friend? Is that an automatic? That the enemy of my enemy is my friend?
It's not an automatic.
It's not automatic.
No, because it probably should be. Because
It should be.
You need to keep your enemies closer.
Right, but in this late date in the country's history, with all these problems and all this corruption, and we've talked about the slow-paced communism in the school and other shows, and we've talked about how we're not giving information, vital information, they're not giving it to us. Is it likely that the enemy of my enemy is my friend these days? We don't know, but it's not so likely like it used to be.
Right,
All
right.
Is it therefore also possible that the enemy of my enemy could even be controlled opposition? In fact, a false hero served up to me to make me think I can fix the problem. In fact, that fellow may have come up with a way to live off of you, to have you subsidize him as he's your enemy and he's actually living off of you. So in other words, this is the parasite that is living off the host, and the host doesn't even know it. The host thinks the parasite's his hero, his defender. Is that also possible?
Right.
It is, isn't it?
Right.
In fact, has this been going on recently, or has this been going on a long time? It's been going on
A long time.
That's right, a very long time. In fact, if you take you all the way back to 1787, some people say not everybody that signed the Constitution in Independence Hall was a friend. Patrick Henry said that. Now, we don't hear much about Patrick Henry, do we? Even back then, it wasn't automatic that the enemy was the King of England. So all those fine men in Independence Hall in that hot summer of 1787 were saying that the enemy is our enemy. But that didn't automatically make them our friend. Now, where I'm going with this is, I hear this all the time from people. In fact, I'm sure some of your listeners probably on September 17 of this year probably got some congratulatory or celebratory email from some political group they know saying, this is a wonderful day in history. Well, was it really? What happened when they came out of Independence Hall that day? They didn't have a Bill of Rights. They had suppressed states' rights. That's not a good day to me, so why are we celebrating that day? It took a pushback by Patrick Henry, Jefferson, other individuals to get us these other vital ingredients to freedom. That should be discussed, but it isn't being discussed. So you see the conditioning process? Even way back then.
It's the dumbing down.
That's right. So if I get my student, and you're asking me what should the student do, and I'm saying be able to distinguish friend from foe. Just because he's my enemy's enemy doesn't make him my friend automatically. I need to know more about my enemy's enemy, his policies, his deeds, his words. I need to know what he says about what happened in 1787. If he tells me that this is a wonderful thing, these men who came out of Independence Hall without a Bill of Rights, I'm not so sure he's my friend. But he comes and says, I am. But I've just heard you tell me this about something crucial in history. You should have come and told me, keep your wits about you, look at the situation as it was. They don't do that very much now, do they? That person should be watched. He's maybe not my friend.
Right. So it's just, it's just mind-boggling about the conditioning process that's going on.
That's right. And that's also something else, which is a point you brought up, I think, very ably and many times before I've heard you say these things. They they took almost any opportunity to condition us. I mean, it could be as simple as looking at a butterfly. They'll come up with some way to give you perhaps some Marxist interpretation or some pro-collective interpretation of that butterfly. Or it could be something from history or economics or science, whatever it might be. And so we have to be constantly on our wits or keep our wits about us. And when we do that, we find you can begin to determine friend from foe. And now, when you make a contribution, you can do good. What does the doctor say? When they take the Hippocratic Oath, if you don't know enough, do nothing. Do no harm. Just stay home. And the problem with a lot of our colleagues is they rush into the public square or into the school board or helping someone for office, and they don't know the first thing about what they're doing. They should stay home.
Right.
They do
They
better.
should.
They should. Instead, they support often false heroes, controlled opposition. Just because the enemy criticizes my enemy doesn't mean I'm going to give him a donation, give him my time, or for that matter, be part of his campaign. But they do it anyway. Do they trust?
Right.
And they shouldn't.
Right.
Especially at this point in time. Reagan was right. Trust but verify. I'll make sure.
Verify everything.
That's right. Verify what I have.
What I would like to say to the students is to trust your teacher, but verify.
That's right. That's right. And start to look at the trends. You're a professor. I mean, I've taught, and I do this with Society of Statesmen. We all have our favorites in history. I mean, I fancy Patrick Henry and Thomas Jefferson. You can know something about me from that. See who your professors seem to fancy. See the kind of questions they ask. You see the kind of books they assign. See the weight they give to different books. Be constantly critically thinking, analyzing what they're doing. And come back to this exercise, we talked about with the budgetary figures here. How do we fix this problem? Well, if we're going to fix it, we need to know what went on in the past. This country was very successful in the past.
Okay. I'd like to thank you once again for coming on our show. To our listeners and our viewers, stay tuned to next week when we air again on the Conservative Action Network. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me on.